Hilary here with Waterlogged on behalf of saltwateraquarium.com, and in this video I'm going to give you a bunch of things that you should be keeping in mind before you ever bring a fish or coral home. So let's get started. Tip number one, make sure you always do your research. If you've been researching, you're gonna know what size tank to get for your fish. A lot of times we see fish or even corals in your local fish store and you're like, oh, that's cool, I wanna bring it home. But little do you know, that fish or coral can get to be fairly large. So a few months down the road even, you may actually have to purchase a new tank. You might be saying, oh darn, but if you get the right size tank to start off with, you're gonna set yourself up for success. Now, the next thing that you should be keeping in mind before you bringing a fish home is you want to make sure you have at least the basics for your species. So that means obviously the correct size tank, but also you're going to want to make sure you have the proper filtration. If you've done your research, you're going to know if your fish is one of those species that's a little bit messier like those pufferfish, and you might need some extra filtration. You have options like sumps, hang-on backs, canister filters, or even tanks that are all-in-one setups that have everything that you need to go forward. The next thing I would recommend having that's a basic item is going to be a heater or a chiller. Now I say a chiller because not all species are going to be those tropical warm water species. There's a growing number of tanks now that are cold water tanks, so if you've got one of those, you're probably going to need a chiller instead of a heater. And the last item of the basic stuff that I would recommend is a light. This is especially important for corals. They're gonna need that light to grow, but also for your fish. You're making an investment in these animals and you wanna be able to see them and enjoy them. Now, there's a whole bunch of other things that you can add to your tank, but those are just some of the basics that I recommend that you have to get started. You can always add things like skimmers and algae scrubbers and media reactors a little bit later on down the line. The third thing that you should be keeping in mind before bringing anything home is compatibility. Now, if you've already got a tank, you're gonna wanna make sure that what you're purchasing isn't an impulse buy. You're gonna wanna know if it gets along with everything else that's already in your tank. If you are buying a new species and doing a completely new setup, I recommend that you do something like this. Go ahead and make yourself a list. You can either do it by the specific animal that you want, or you can do it based on tank size. But whatever that list is, put it somewhere that you can see on the refrigerator. That way, as you're putting your tank together and you're adding animals, you only add stuff on that list. That reduces those impulse buys and sets you up for success. Next category that we're going to talk about is aquascaping. Now, I know you might say, well, you don't really need to worry about that. You can always adjust things later, and you can. But if you've done your research, you're gonna know what the wild habitats of these animals look like, so you can plan for that. Say, for an example, you need a species of wrasse that has the substrate. Well, it's a lot easier to add substrate in the very beginning than it is to add it after your tank is already established. And the same goes for rockwork. There's some types of basslets that like to hang out in some of those darker overhangs. And if you know that, you can go ahead and aquascape your tank to have that ready for your fish. And if your fish feels safe in its new environment, it's gonna be a lot healthier and you are gonna be successful as a hobbyist and as an aquarist. Now, the last thing that you shouldn't start a new fish or a coral without is food, obviously. So if you've already got a tank, chances are you're gonna have food that is your fish and your coral's favorite food, but even if you're bringing home a new fish, like I mentioned in my previous videos, ask at the local store that you bought your species from what that species is already eating. You can bring that and add that to the mix of food you're already feeding, and it's going to ensure a smoother transition for that animal into your tank. Now, if you're buying a brand new fish and doing a new setup, again, same rule applies. Go ahead and get that food. That way it feels comfortable once it gets home to your tank. If you're not sure if you're getting a new fish and you're kind of a beginner, stay tuned for my next video. I'm going to talk about all the different types of foods that are available out on the market. This has been Hilary for Waterlogged on behalf of Saltwater Aquarium. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.